Hi there, this is Matt at State of Flux here with some thoughts on Scream 7. There's been quite a bit of news coming out, and I don't really address film news. It's something that I've been thinking of dabbling in, so if this video does well, if you guys are interested in it, maybe I can do a weekly news wrap-up. But more to the story at hand, there's been quite a bit of news coming out about Scream 7 after a long period of silence up until December. We've kind of gotten updates, mostly negative, for this film. And this one has touched me quite a bit because it's my favorite franchise in cinema history. I'm a huge Scream fan. You may have heard me talk about them extensively in both my reviews for Scream 2022 and Scream 6, as well as my pitch video for what Scream 6 should have been. And Scream 7 is one that I am very conflicted with. I was pretty pumped for, if you go back to my review of Scream 6, the idea of a 7. And the rumblings that I'd been hearing at the time was that 7 was kind of going to be the end of a trilogy and a definitive ending to a certain storyline for at least a little while. But then everything kind of went cold, and then all kinds of shit hit all kinds of fans. And we went from having a really talented, fresh new director in Christopher Landon, who's a filmmaker that I really quite like, to having neither of the two main characters, Sam or Tara, as well as the director jumping ship. Now, it sounds like Jenna Ortega was always going to have a more minimal role in 7 due to scheduling conflicts, but the loss of Marissa Barrera is its own separate video that I could do, honestly, but it is truly unfortunate because she was such a vital character in the film, and I'm talking just the film landscape. Outside of it, there's even more complexities and stuff, and it's something that I sort of don't stand with certain decisions that were made. That being said, the character of Sam, the character of Tara were so integral to the story that if you're not going to use them, I don't really see a way you can pave forth in any meaningful way. Now, in order to continue this discussion with the news that just dropped this past week, or I guess 2 weeks ago at the point that you're watching this, the return of Neve Campbell as Sidney Prescott to the franchise, we need to take the clock back a whole year and a half to when it was announced that she would not be participating in Scream 6. This was news met with a lot of negativity, and half of it I completely understand. The fact that she is not included in Scream 6 due to a issue with pay dispute is effing ridiculous. She is not only a star in her own right, but the face of your franchise, because believe it or not, Scream is not built around Ghostface so much as it is built around the characters and the heroes. And yes, you established 2 new ones to lead the charge moving forward, but that does not diminish what Neve Campbell brought to this franchise. That being said, I thought her exclusion from 6 was the best possible thing for this franchise, because if you bring Sidney back, you're only bringing her back to put her through more maiming and more torturing, and I tend to view these films as character movies. They are not about the big bad boogeyman that the Halloween franchise is with Michael Myers. Billy Loomis has a firm hold in this grand story, but it's not his story. It's always been Sidney's. It's always been the survivors, and now it was time for her to pass that baton on to 2 other characters. So I was happy to retire the character of Sidney Prescott. I needed nothing more from her. So I was met with Scream 6 in this weird place where, on one hand, I was furious with the studio for not acknowledging the quality that they had in an actress who I think is one of the finest of her generation and is one of the most underrated actresses, full stop, to also being kind of elated that this is a franchise that can evolve in necessary ways to move the story forward and not continue putting this survivor through more and more and more trauma. because I think that is sending a kind of weird and wicked message that this franchise is already teetering on some crass notions, such as this is the meanest-spirited franchise in all of film history, as Patrick H. Willems pointed out on his Letterboxd, where he is like, anytime one of these people goes through a trauma, they're going to make a movie about it, and then they're going to sell tickets and toys and masks, and it's going to be a public thing in a never-ending cycle. And yes, there is some truth to that, to our own personal world, but it is an ugliness of the franchise that we were finally being able to evolve away from by retiring Sidney. So, we were met this past week, or 2 weeks ago as you're viewing this, with the return of not only Neve Campbell to the franchise of Scream, but also the return of Kevin Williamson. But we're not getting Kevin Williamson, the writer, who wrote arguably the 3 best Scream movies, or inarguably 3 of the best Scream movies, in the masterpiece that is the first one, which is untouchable in its quality and the best of the franchise, what I would consider the best sequel of the entire franchise, and the most boundary-pushing movie in that it is willing to be multiple other genres, including a musical at one point, with 2 points really, with Scream 2, and the brilliant deconstruction of the reboot that, or remake, that is Scream 4. However, Kevin Williamson is not returning as writer. We're getting half of the writing team that brought us Scream 5 and 6, and that's not a bad thing. Scream 5 is a very strong screenplay, and Scream 6 is certainly a screenplay. We're getting Guy Busick to come back and write. James Vanderbilt is no longer part of the writing duo for Scream 7, and I don't know who pulled what in this arrangement, but he's a solid enough writer if looking at Scream and Scream 6 is to say anything. The concern is Kevin Williamson has only directed one thing in his entire career, and that is the film Teaching Mrs. Tingle, which you may hear me slip and refer to as Killing Mrs. Tingle, because I followed this movie religiously, and at one point it was called Killing Mrs. Tingle. Killing Mrs. Tingle, if you are not familiar with it, is a 1999 film written and directed by Kevin Williamson. This was something that he had really wanted to make, and he had wanted to film Scream himself, but that was not something that was in the cards. Similar to how Sylvester Stallone was able to sell Rocky as writer, he was never able to sell it as director until he was a proven entity. And so rather than direct Scream 2, Wes Craven was invited to return back, and there was a moment's notice where Kevin Williamson was going to direct and write Halloween H2O before he pivoted on to this film, an original, I think loosely original story called Teaching Mrs. Tingle. If you've ever seen that movie, it is a solid idea with a terrible execution. It is incredibly poorly directed. Now, I don't know if it's mismanaged in its direction because of the Harvey Weinstein of it all, if he got his fingers into things, because this was around the time that She's All That had hit, and once She's All That hit, he became a micromanager to every filmmaker, and he had already been doing this prior to, and not just him, both the Weinsteins, Bob as well. Even on Scream, you can hear Kevin Williamson and Wes Craven both articulate in interviews and stuff like that how hard of a time they had making the first Scream, to the point where Wes Craven even almost walked out of that film. And there are commentaries, I believe even on Swamp Thing, where Wes Craven makes allusions to the struggles that he had with a certain Hollywood film producer, that he learned how to navigate those problems in his older age, and it doesn't take much to figure out who he's talking about. Hell, if you look at it in a certain way, Scream 3 is the first real Me Too movement movie, kind of exposing the dark side to both Hollywood and the filmmakers who are also running the show behind the cameras. All of this is to say that Kevin Williamson has only established one film to his credit as director, and it was not a powerhouse performance. So his return does not elate me as if he had been returning to write the screenplay. I might be much more interested. As is what I think we will have is we will have Kevin Williamson there to spearhead a screenplay that he didn't write, but certainly can do uncredited rewrites too, if not ultimately credited. I don't know where this movie's going to land. But we might have something interesting going on there, because you have the mastermind who wrote and shaped many of the great films here in a very powerful role, where he should be able to maximize the qualities of that script. I just am not confident that he's going to be able to exercise control over the horror of the film. Now, he made Teaching Mrs. Tingle a mere 3 years after, less than really, after Scream became a hit. He has since worked in the film and television world extensively for many, many years. It does shock me that he never once became a filmmaker behind any of the shows he created, be it Vampire Diaries, be it Dawson's Creek, be it even The Following, which was his sort of retooling of a premise that he had devised for the original concept of Scream 3. So that does give me some worry. However, he's been in the process so long. Hopefully he has learned the filmmaking tools needed to engage and make this movie a genuinely great horror film on its own right, and a good continuation and or conclusion of whatever story they have devised. Now, moving back to the Sidney of it, it disappoints me that they want to bring Sidney back. I get it. They've lost the face of their franchise due to their own decisions and choices, but they also have brought back a face that we don't need anymore. Now, if they want to bring back other characters, that's fine. I imagine that there's a plausible world where they bring both Courtney Cox's Gale Weathers back, as well as Kirby Reed, maybe making another go of the story, and that would be kind of interesting. If I were to pitch Scream 7 myself, if you want to include any of these quote-unquote legacy characters, I think you have to frame the movie around Kirby, because in the previous film they kind of installed that in for the franchise moving forward. She is a ghost face hunter. She specializes in the FBI for ghost face killers, suggesting that there's been other ones that we're not privy to, and we're not privy to in that story, and they didn't pertain because it didn't connect to any of the characters that were involved. Yet it suggested that there are other active ghost face incidents out there, and she's the one to suss out who they are, what they're doing, and why. Framing the film around Kirby, to me, makes the most sense. And you can have, say, like, somebody's going back to try to kill the survivors. You can bring back, there are other characters that have survived this franchise that don't get thought of very much. You have the two sorority girls from Scream 2. Scream 2 actually had a lot of characters that kind of made it out. They were just more minor. But if you have Portia de Rossi and Rebecca Gayheart at your disposal, why not use them? They're both phenomenal actresses, and they were fun as hell in Scream 2. Not to mention the cameraman in Scream 2 surviving, being the only smart one that leaves but comes back at the very end of the film. You have, that's pretty much it, honestly. Come to think of it, there's not a whole lot that survived beyond that, and the core four. So you could have a ghost face that's targeting prior scenes of the crime, like more attacks at Windsor College, more attacks at that movie theater outside of Windsor College, more attacks at Casey Becker's house, at the Scream Studios, Sunrise Studios, or whatever they called it. And you could pull back to different areas and try to organically write out Sam and Tara. However, I think you've gotten to a point where you have to acknowledge them in some way, and they have to be there. And I think we do live in a world where enough money might speak, and you get cameos or an appearance out of them. And maybe if this there's some way to salvage this, I don't know how you do it, but the studio can bury the hatchet with Marissa Barrera and get her involvement once more, because they were setting up a story that they clearly can't go on with any longer, and that is truly and genuinely disappointing. And I think, in all honesty, part of the qualities that made Scream 6 not my favorite is that they wrote a screenplay with a character in it that they could no longer use, and so they weren't able to pivot out of that nosedive perfectly. I still liked Scream 6, but there are definite flaws and noticeable errors throughout the film, and I think it's because they had to radically reshape the film in a very small window of time. And I have a feeling that the studio is more interested in hitting street deadlines than they are with making a product that is quite good. And when you get into that territory, you kind of get into the Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends of it all. And that's pretty damn disappointing with a franchise that, as of now, doesn't have a single bad entry. You have certainly less good ones, but no bad ones. No outright bad or unwatchable movies. So, that's kind of my general thoughts on Scream 7. I'm happy that Neve Campbell is getting probably a good sum of money and what she is worth for this franchise. But I'm disappointed that they're bringing her character back, because I was happy that she got her happily ever after, presumably with Mark Kincaid. So we might see a Patrick Dempsey reprisal in this coming movie, and maybe we get the Meeks twins to come back for this one. However, that's got to be hard on them to not stand by one of their other core four co-stars. You had a really good thing going, and the studio themselves shot themselves in the foot, not once but twice, by dissing Neve Campbell and then firing an actress based on some perceived thoughtlessness, let's put it that way. However, my hopes for Scream 7 are always going to be high. I hope it's going to be good. I've never disliked anything in this franchise, but I sure as shit don't have as much faith in this entry as I did in any of the prior ones. And it's something that's kind of weird. Ever since Scream 3, I've had a fear that the movie that I'm going to get isn't going to be a good one. It might be because the first Scream is my favorite. The second one was almost as good, and the third one was a step down. I was worried it was going to be bad, and certainly wasn't bad, but it was definitely noticeably worse than the other two. And then I was terrified at Scream 4 because it was an unjustified sequel that found its justification. I was even more terrified at Scream 5 with a Wes Craven-less entry, and they were able to justify that as well. And that had me a little more confident for 6, but then everything with Campbell happened, and then I was concerned moving forward, and this one I think is the most concerned I've ever been. What are your thoughts on Scream 7? Did you like this format? Maybe I'll do it more. They'll probably be a lot shorter, or maybe I can do a live stream of like news updates once a week. I think that could be really fun. Let me know in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Peace.